We are going live now. It should be a few seconds.
Thank you, Carolina.
We are live.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Design Commission, and welcome. Deborah Martin has agreed to chair today's meeting. I will hand it off to her.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Martin and welcome to the Public Design Commission meeting. Today's meeting is being held in person in City Hall. Members of the public can attend and give testimony either in person or remotely. We'll now begin the committee meeting with the conceptual review of the construction of a community center, the Brownsville Girls Empowerment Center and Community Hub, 444 Thomas S. Boylan Street between East New York Avenue and Pitkin Avenue, Brooklyn. We will not hear public testimony or vote on this project today. You can begin and welcome.
Great, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lissa So. I'm a partner at Marvel, and I'm joined here with my colleagues, J.S. Young and Danielle Cerrone. And we're here on behalf of the Gilbane Marvel Design Build team. And we've been working with DDC to design the Brownsville Empowerment Center and the Community Hub, where we've also been working with HRA and Lower East Side Girls Club, which will be the tenants for the new facility. The project is located in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn. We're also showing on this map the location of the existing Lower East Side Girls Club. And as you said, the site is located in Thomas S. Boylan Street between Pitkin Avenue and East New York Avenue, close to the Marcus Garvey houses, also directly across the street from the 73rd Precinct, also pretty close to the Brownsville Public Library. Here are a couple of images of the existing community center, which is originally designed by Bond Ryder and Associates. And you can see the building is really set back from the street quite a bit, and there's a fence that separates the sidewalk from the site. And we know that there were comments from PDC that the new building should really be brought to the street to create a street wall and really activate the sidewalk. This is a photo standing a little bit further back from Pitkin Avenue. You can see Pitkin is very much a retail corridor with lower buildings, 2 to 3 story buildings. And then looking from the other side, the north side of the site with Marcus Garvey houses, they're taller buildings, 6 stories. So we also had heard that PDC had talked about really looking at the height of the building from Pitkin and going from a lower building up to a higher building. Here's a couple images of the existing facility where Community Board 16 has a meeting area in the lobby. It's a big double height lobby. And then a couple images of the Girls Club looking at the lobby, and then also this wonderful multi-purpose room that it opens up onto an interior courtyard, which is used a lot in the spring and fall months. And then also existing images of the Lower East Side Girls Club cafe and their kitchen. So this is a section cut through the new facility. On the lower 2 floors, it will house the Brooklyn Community Board 16 meeting for the community, 13,000 square foot of rentable space for community-based organizations, and a 1,500 square foot community garden. The 3rd and the 4th floors will be 18,000 square feet of the Brownsville Girls Empowerment Center with STEM, arts, digital media, sound, wellness, civic engagement, and leadership programs for young women. This is a diagram just showing the program within the building, the blue being the community board program, the yellow being the HRA program, and then the Girls Club in the pink. So looking at the massing strategy for the building, we really wanted to hold that street wall and then carve out the southern portion of the site, which has the maximum sunlight exposure for the community garden. And then, as I mentioned before, really step the building up from the lower portion of Pitkin Avenue up to the northern side of the site. And with that stepping, we're looking at doing occupied terraces with that maximum exposure. You can see the site plan. The tax lot currently occupies the entire through lot portion from Boyland through to Amboy Street. The new building will take up half of the lot, and the other half will be open for future development, potentially affordable housing. So to quickly walk through the plans, we do have a partial cellar for incoming services and mechanical. The ground floor is shared by all programs with the community board and HRA on the left side, and then the girls club in pink on the right side. And then you can also see the community garden on the left side of the page. And then we're doing an interior courtyard for the girls club. That is, it's a protected interior courtyard. On the second floor are HRA offices, space ranging from 550 square feet to 3,200 square feet. And then on the third floor are girls clubs programs for studios, classrooms. There's a planetarium space at the north side of the building, and then also an occupied roof terrace. And then on the fourth level, there's an environmental center, labs, offices, and a rooftop garden. And at the top of the building, the roof, there's mechanical that will be screened in, and any portion that isn't mechanical will be green roof. And here's an image of the community garden that will have access both from the street as well as from the lobby. And then we've also identified the one wall as a potential place for a percent for art candidate. Looking at a longitudinal section showing the double height lobby for HRA, and then you can also see the planetarium space at the top of the building. A cross section through the girls club portion, looking at the lobby, and then there's a nice double height space that's a lobby for the planetarium, and then again the interior courtyard in the back. And then just a section cutting through the HRA lobby with the nice double height space with an open stair and access up to the second floor. So in looking at facade articulation, we wanted a material expression of the different programs of the HRA program and the girls club, and with the HRA being more open and transparent, and the girls club being a little bit more solid and looking at masonry. And then we started to think about how could you begin to connect the massing and start to thinking of weaving the two together. And we began to look at a vertical articulation really that brings the masonry down from the girls club to the ground and connects the two programs together. And then we looked at, we wanted to really highlight some of the special spaces like the lobbies and then the planetarium lobby. So our team has had further, we're beginning to further explore the facade and looking ideas of concepts of weaving. We were quite inspired when we went to the girls club and looked at the ideas of making, and they're using different fabrics. And so we began to think about that and gain inspiration from different African textiles. And really, we began to look at this kente fabric, which really symbolizes hope and confidence and the restoration of dignity. And we began to study that in looking at the facade design, and particularly with inspiration of pattern and thinking about thickness and spacing and infill. And so in our initial concept design, we had somewhat of a more rigid vertical grid and vertical articulation. And when we come back to you with our preliminary design, we'll be sharing a more developed facade design that will be more layered and based on the inspiration of this particular pattern of the kente cloth, where you can see there's initial diagram showing a little bit more of a nuanced approach, which we'd really be proposing one brick, but we'd be looking at different pattern through pushing and pulling the brick and having articulation of that brick.
So are you actually considering that kind of color?
That's a very good question. So we're not gaining inspiration from the color in particular, really more from the pattern and the texture. So and if I jump ahead, we're really looking at one color brick, but that we would begin to have that inspiration through the kind of the pushing and pulling and more pattern within this. So this is still kind of that simplified vertical articulation. But when we come back for preliminary, this will be that more developed with that inspiration of the Kente fabric.
Got it. Because the inspiration is beautiful. And I think one of the things that it's a beautiful project and I love it, but one of the things that the facade is certainly lacking is the color and the inspiration that you're getting from the Kente. Right?
Yeah. And I think that, if we look at this, and this is a great diagram that starts to look at, having a little bit more of a primary grid and then a secondary grid, but also beginning to develop some pattern with the horizontals as well. And then this just starts to show with that vertical and horizontal beginning to develop, the difference between the openness of the HRA and then a little bit more solid articulation of the Girls Club. So again, looking at using an iron spot red brick Roman size, and then the brick fins will be a custom brick fin, and then curtain wall for the larger openings like the planetarium lobby, and then a more punched opening for the Girls Club window. And looking at the west elevation that carries around. And then the north and the south elevation, the south being open to that community garden, and then the terraces, so there'll be more windows on that side. This is a lot line condition, and so HRA was not really wanting to put any windows on that lot line. And then finishing with a few renderings, bird's eye view, looking at that step terrace. And then a view, if you're coming from Pickett Avenue, you can see the large double height HRA lobby and the Girls Club to the north. And then from the north, looking south at the Girls Club entrance, and then the large planetarium window above. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and JS and Danielle, feel free to answer them as well. Yeah.
Market rate or subsidized, how you decide who you bring them to the tenants for the rentable space?
I mean, Andrew, maybe that's a good question for you, but it's run by HRA, and it's community-based organizations that rent through HRA. Yes, and they're different sizes. Some are smaller, 550 to much larger, close to 4,000.
Hello.
Yeah.
And then, so this HRA, again, will own this facility. They have several multi-service centers already throughout the throughout New York City. So essentially HRA releases a contract. They'll do that a few months before our substantial completion to an operator that will operate this facility for those rentable office spaces. Right now, there's no conclusive idea of what type of programming we'll have until they release an RFP. But essentially what we're aiming for is nonprofit organizations that help steer into, young women and young men empowerment throughout the Brownsville community. So again, that will be the target audience. But again, we will have to wait until the RFP is released from the operator for those rentable office spaces.
So thanks for the update. Couple of questions. I know that we had mentioned, and I know that the interior isn't any of under our jurisdiction, but one of my concerns has to do with the circulation of the Girls Club and how circulation is really key to any organization, because it's a place for community in a building like this.
Yeah.
And although there's a very generous circulation for HRA, we don't quite know who they all are and if they're all the same, or it seems like the place where you really need this big community stair is for the Girls Club, and they're sliced on one layer of that cake with HRA, right on the second floor. Is that right? Or is it the third?
HRAs at the second floor?
They're
Yeah.
on the
So
they come all the way through, which seems really unfortunate.
yeah.
So that's one question. And then another question. I mean, we can take one at a time if you want. Or...
Yeah. I mean, so we totally agree that stair really the girls need to be using that stair. You know, the elevator
Yeah, that's
doesn't really
theirs.
want to be used on a daily basis, right? Only when needed.
So
And
right there.
and so we actually, when we come back, we've been studying this quite a bit. And when we come back to a preliminary, we've already looked at doing a design that really opens up that stair to the lobby, kind of steps it out into the lobby as well. Making it part of, this is really used as a multi-purpose space. Sometimes it's an art gallery, it's sometimes it's, you know, it's a gathering space. And so really
But
making
that's an
that stair.
egress stair, right?
This is an egress stair, but what we're looking to do is, and we've done it on a couple school projects, where you open up just the ground to the second floor,
Mhm.
and then you can have a door that closes off
Yeah,
that stair. So it basically, it announces the stair, it shows that's the way to
because
to
I
get
think
up to
it'll
that upper
really
level.
be a big sense of community, I would imagine,
I
right?
totally agree.
Yeah,
I totally
okay.
agree.
Great. So a second question has to do with still the facade and you know, while I appreciate the looking to these African textiles, it seems, I'm going to use the word superficial at the moment. And I think, you know, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here, not that I would want to tell an artist what to do, but if there was an artist who was interested in working with you on the facade, for instance, because we've seen some great projects where that's happened at the lot. There was a library in Queens that was really fantastic. With, I think it was with Weissman Freddie or something, they were working with the brick, with the botanical. So, I mean, instead of just saying, oh, artist, you can be here on this wall,
Yeah.
you know, end of conversation, seems like even though we're in this design build world, I would think that if you don't have your artist, it would be a great opportunity to add that to your list of possibilities, because I
Yeah.
think you might get a deeper,
Mhm.
maybe more connected, and maybe the artist might even work with the girls. I don't know, I'm making all this up in my
Yeah.
dream world, but it would be great if there was some connection with the community and the artist. I don't know, I'll let Vince take over on that if he wants to. And that's a prompt, that's a prompt. Okay, that'll,
I mean, I don't know how to say it in really delicate terms, so I'm just gonna just dive right in. I think we're at the precipice of a kind of cultural appropriation. I would say that. And to have a meaningful expression of, you know, I don't know, I've been to the factories where they make kente cloth in Ghana and Bonwari, and
Mhm.
I'm not sure as an African-American that I would say that I know the full intent of why it is that people use different kente cloth, but the cloth of kings is a fine place to start as inspiration. I don't think that as the facade design direction is in any way insulting, but I don't think that it adds heft to the building. And I could understand trying to find an organizing principle. My main question when I saw this design was, what is the organizing principle for these vertical striations? And so now you've got one, but it still feels to me slightly artificial.
Mhm.
And to make it intrinsic to people, and, you know, to use another idiom to say, like with, in the Twi language, there's this term Sankofa, you can return and get it. But you can go back and get it, but that means some activity. I don't feel like there isn't a way in architecture now to even describe, you know, like there's Italian and French colonial, but there isn't Africanate. But this is of that ilk.
Mhm.
And so, you know, having a conversation with like David Ajay and I don't know that this feels like it is added to the facade, this emotional connection or cultural connection as place, as content. So I want to speak in plain language that I think, yes, giving it a reason to have this rhythm and pattern based on kente is one thing, but then the facade has to have some relationship. It's not just like putting on a piece of cloth. So I don't know that you've made more there.
Okay.
So I would definitely agree that working with an artist and possibly, like the only two architects I know who actually do this on a consistent basis are David Ajayi and Francis Carrick.
Maybe
But
Mario could and Mario.
Who could be helpful with this also?
I mean, but I'm saying, yes, it could be a collaboration with an artist. But then even if you use this as an inspiration, how it is that it will be read by people in the community, whether it will be seen as an Africanized facade.
Yeah,
So I'm all for in the built environment, having things that reflect upon the legacy of African diaspora. I've never been against that. I'm so for that. And yet this doesn't feel like it intrinsically has that power and that heft. So and this is where I'm sort of going on. I don't like hypotheticals. So I can't see what you're gonna do from your inspiration, what you're gonna do.
Yeah.
So I can't say whether it will feel like more.
yeah, I hear that.
So that's problematic for me. So I can't give you good advice. I can just say that from what your stated intention is, and from A to B from the future facade design direction, what you're doing for the rhythm and pattern doesn't make it seem to me like you've created in the built environment an Africanized facade or an African location. And, before, the Black Panther movies and David Ajayi and Francis Carrick, there wasn't even a genre of an urban large scale. So I don't know that there's such a thing as a precedent other than looking at how somebody else might have done this, how an artist might perceive of it, having a lot more design studies to give us more of a direction so that we feel grounded. Does that make any sense? That was very long.
Yeah.
And
No,
I
that's good.
apologize as anecdote, it was long.
No, that was great. Thank you.
I just had one other question I realized was about can we go back to the window, the big window? I just had a question about that because I just saw it in that one facade and I was wondering what's up there. You see it in the rendering. We were asking for a night view, but
Yeah,
but I know you didn't have time. So the big window there. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's,
going on there.
that's the planetarium is on the right side of this.
Yes.
And so there's a nice big double height lobby for the
Lobby for
planetarium space.
Planetarium. So
Yeah.
that's a curtain wall.
It is.
That's curtain wall.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then, oh, no, go ahead. You're just gonna talk about that private garden, but maybe.
No, I just had a comment on the facade.
Okay.
Just, I would say just regardless of how you decide to take on, the feedback that's been received. One of the things that stands out to me with these renderings is that the color of the facade is extremely monolithic. And one of the great things about the fabrics is that they do have not just color, but if you were to squint your eyes and not necessarily perceive the color, they have a lot of contrast amongst the different tones. So another thought to try to bring in perhaps a little bit more, local artistry is maybe testing whether there are different bricks or different glazing that could be used to give it an ever so slightly changing tone, texture, sheen, so that it does speak a little bit more to that rhythm that we see on the fabrics as opposed to being just a pure geometric interpretation.
Yeah.
And through that process, perhaps there are some local artisans that could be involved, I don't know. But maybe another way to just give it a little bit more depth, similar to what the fabrics have.
Yeah.
Is it it would be a panelized brick,
No, it'd be hand laid brick.
handling brick?
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a lot.
Because there's the work and the work. Yeah. On that. I mean, I think it would be very exciting to work with an artist. I know it seems like sometimes. What would be the word? It kind of gets out of, it's not in your control. But I think that if you found the right artist, I think it would be a great collaboration, if it was possible. I don't know where you are on that arts and architecture design build project, what that schedule's like. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
But you know. You gotta look at the schedule, maybe it's possible.
But philosophically, presenting something that has this Africanized facade, which there isn't actually a term for. I made up that term Africanate to describe the work of Francis Carey, David Ajay. It is not in common usage or parlance. I just made it up because no one does it. And it's what I do as a sculptor. I make things that are Africanized facades that go into neighborhoods. But that being said, how it is that people read this and whether or not, you know, it's not that you have to be an African architect or an African artist, but it will still feel like cultural appropriation without some significant partnership to make this. Like, you know, when Francis Carey, you know, wins this big award and gets to do a pavilion in the Hyde Park, it's fantastic. But he's actually creating in a context where, as an African architect, he's presenting African ideas and creating something in the built environment. And what you're doing is only reflecting that in this one facade, and it will feel like a facade to people if it isn't handled properly. And so you really need a partnership, in my opinion, of some sort.
There are other architects besides those two.
I know I see getting to do this in the built environment consistently. And I would like a longer list, Lori, and I'll talk to you about it later, but those are the top two. Yeah. And is there a term for that? Exactly. And that's why I made it up.
So moving on to other topics.
Yeah.
Going on to the street garden, I think it's really nice to have a garden on the street that the community can actually physically see
Yeah,
what is going on in the building. I think some of the commentary was, you know, some of the girls' club activities maybe need to be a little bit less transparent. And this is an opportunity to bring transparency onto the street. Obviously, you need to have a fence, I understand that, but I'm wondering if there's a way to work with the fence to make it as porous as it can be, even incorporate opportunities for signage, educational signage, so that as people are walking down the street, they actually understand what's going on in the garden. And there's a way to kind of bring in some of those activities out to the community in perhaps a more permanent and incorporated way than we see on many community gardens where someone just posts a sign
Right.
after the fact. So just thought about how, you know, it could be a little more porous or inviting to the
Yeah.
community.
I know in the renderings, we were showing a more solid door too, in addition to the open fence, and we absolutely agree. It should be as open as it possibly can while still being secure. But I think the signage is a great suggestion.
Is there a graphic design or on board for your project?
Yeah.
Great, it's great.
Oh, yes.
Well, is there any entire building or is it mostly array? I think that's also part of it too, you know, is
There's
it like
been a lot
labeled
of-
as a community center or?
A lot of conversation about the name of this project. I mean, it's Brownsville Girls Empowerment Center and Community Hub at the moment. You know, it's a very long name for the project, but you know, really based in the idea of being an empowerment center, as Andrew said, even with the HRA programming, you know, it's not just about the girls club, but also the community groups that will occupy those offices.
Yeah, I think my thought on the facade. I guess you know, if you think of like the Museum for African American, you know, History, David Ajay's building, you know, the facade is very, you know, ornamental and it's pictorial and it, you know, you look at it, it signifies, you know, kind of like African background. I guess my question is, you know, does the facade need to signify that?
Yeah.
You know, in a pictorial or ornamental way, because it seems primarily structural and organizational. I think that kind of goes back to what Kenseth was saying. Does it have to have this essentialized idea of like, you know, being Africanist in some way, or, you know, is it something that's more organizational in terms of how it's displaying like what's inside of the building or articulating the program on the facade?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really great conversation. I think, you know, the original concept was really being able to identify those two different programs that were happening within the building, and then starting to weave them together with that vertical articulation. you know, then we came to that idea of looking at the textile, but you know, maybe we need to kind of step back and rethink that, whether it is working with an artist or what is really the meaning behind that, and if it is appropriate or not, no?
Where you're at the precipice of whether or not that facade is placemaking.
Yeah.
Accessing another culture, or whether it is to organize rhythm and pattern in a particular way so that the light falls. And these are
Yeah,
not mutually exclusive, but
yeah, that's very well said.
that's why I get the big house.
Yeah.
Is there another view of the facade that's more
Yeah.
front on?
Yeah.
Do you want to look at an elevation? I mean, there's these two renderings
That's-
and then the aerial view.
Any of them, that's fine. I know that you're gonna redo the facade in different, and come back to us in different ways, but I think that the brick line, brick articulation sort of bisecting the windows, I feel like on the larger windows, it may work better. On the smaller windows, for example, on the top two floors, it almost picks up the fence from the garden, which I know the fence will be redone too, but it's sort of like it's almost a barrier and not an opening, so it makes it less welcoming, and it makes it look like almost like bars on the windows. I know some people have felt, including me. So it is an institutional building, but those aspects on the windows, I think, make it come off as more institutional and less kind of a part of the neighborhood.
And I think that's your comment, exactly what really led us to thinking about creating more pattern in the facade. Like right now, it's a pretty rigid vertical grid, and wanting to kind of break that up and looking at maybe a primary and a secondary grid. And then also introducing a little bit more of a horizontal, so it isn't so rigid in its articulation.
You know, the reason I mentioned the color before, and obviously, Ken said, what he's brought into this conversation is incredibly important, but. And it's a great project. It's a monumental project for Brownsville, right? This is incredible asset that's being built, an investment in the community. And I think we've all seen so many city structures that look so institutional, right? Older structures. And I know you're trying to do something very dramatically different here, but there are points at which the building still looks a little institutional because of the very consistent color scheme and patterns here. So I just feel like it still somehow looks a little institutional, and some variations here would help it look less so.
I just want to say, I think it's so exciting that you're doing this project and what the city is doing. It's incredibly exciting that this will be built.
Yeah.
And I think it's try to understand how difficult. I probably don't understand what it's to design build a project like this. On the one hand, you want to do everything you can. On the other hand, you've got this schedule and like moving behind you with these guys at the foundations and already. So I just,
Exactly.
Find that help to get what you need here, and evaluate as much as you can. So
I appreciate that.
we appreciate it.
So before I summarize, any last comments from anyone? So Lisa, I want to echo Lori's comments that this is going to be an incredible asset for the community. Thank you for this presentation and for the kind of really thoughtful work that went into every aspect of this inside and out. There are 3 comments basically that I'll summarize. One is not really our purview, but has to do with the circulation, which you're already looking at for the Girls Club. The second is thinking about some signage on the garden and making it more kind of understandable to passersby. And then the third group of comments has to do with first applauding your inspiration of the Kente cloth as being like very appropriate and beautiful inspiration for a facade in a community that is predominantly African-American. And then thinking about how you can bring more integrity to the design of that.
Yeah.
Using that, bringing that inspiration forward. So how you do that, whether it's a partnership with an artist, whether it's a partnership with David Ajay, whether it's reaching out to some of the African architects at Mass Design Group, that's up to you. We're just encouraging you to give to this community something that will really like bring forward and celebrate your really excellent idea of the Kenticloth as an inspiration to bring some both conceptual and sort of like aesthetic elegance to what is already really a very beautiful structure. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. So our next committee item is the preliminary review of the reconstruction of the lower Vale and the conceptual review of the reconstruction of the upper Vale in Prospect Park. Of course. Okay, we're going to take a quick break before the Vale and we will return momentarily. Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you.
to chair today's meeting.
I'm Deborah Martin, and welcome again to the Public Design Commission meeting. Our next committee item is the preliminary review of the reconstruction of the Lower Vale and the conceptual review of the reconstruction of the Upper Vale, including construction of the Northeast Pavilion, and this is all in Prospect Park on Flatbush Avenue between Grand Army Plaza and the Prospect Park Zoo in Brooklyn. And you may proceed. Thank you. Sorry, Christian, one more thing. Please note that the preliminary review of the Lower Vale is on today's consent agenda and will not hear public testimony or vote on this project today. Now,
Thank you for having us. I'm Christian Zimmerman. I'm the Vice President for Capital and Landscape Management of the Prospect Park Alliance. I'm here today with Svetlana Ragolina, our Senior Landscape Architect, and David Yum, our Senior Architect. We are going through 3 projects that we kind of folded into one. It's the Upper Vale, the Lower Vale, and the Northeast Pavilion. To orient you a little, there's Grand Army Plaza, Brooklyn Public Library, Brooklyn Museum. Our project area is on the northeast portion of the park, adjacent to Flatbush Avenue, right off of the Long Meadow. The actual project area is this kind of funny shape, but it is the Upper Vale, which was formerly called the Rose Garden, and then the Lower Vale, which is children's pool at the pond. Here's Flatbush Avenue, the Brooklyn Botanic Garden right across the street. When we first started this project, we did an extensive community outreach, and this was in 2017, 2018. We were trying to figure out what to do within this area. We had just finished the Lakeside Center, and we were now looking at our next restoration project. So we did an extensive community outreach program. We went virtual, we went in person, we went to tabling at the farmers market, we went to community centers, we went to churches, synagogues, we went all over to try and get the input from as many different types of people, users, as we could. We wound up having key takeaways that were what people really liked about it is the preserving the natural areas, adding site amenities. There are very few amenities there, like bathrooms in the park and or in this portion of the park. So they wanted that enhanced. They wanted more trees, more plantings as well. And then they wanted passive seating areas. They wanted areas where they could sit down and just relax, and all age groups that they were looking at. And so from 2017, 2018, we did that. We received the money, the funding from the former mayor, and COVID happened. So after that, we went back and wanted to reaffirm, these are the assumptions back in 2017, 2018. We said, okay, is the public feeling the same way? And we pretty much got the same kind of input from them. The project I'm talking about specifically is what's called the Lower Vale. It is closely pretty much a restoration project, most significantly a restoration. It is part of the original design. It has a number of historic layers. But what we looked at is we wanted to restore the existing historical architectural elements. It's a pond. It's a pond in this northeast area. So we wanted to bring that back. It doesn't function right now. And also what we wanted to do is enhance the habitat of the area. We're part of the migratory Northeast. So coming through birds north and south, depending on their cycle. And it's a major birding area. And we wanted to enhance that as well. And the other major piece is it is not accessible, ADA accessible at all, this whole project. So it was very important for us to make it accessible. Historically, it's really kind of an interesting site. On the left, you'll see that's the original Olmsted and Vox design, very naturalistic ponds, little peninsulas. And then McKim, Mead and White, the architecture firm, came in and they mapped this out before they made the changes, and then they formalized it. They left the natural spaces intact, but then what they did is they formalized it by putting in some major architectural elements, marble balustrades, piers, granite coping. And Then later in the thirties, you can see the shape changing slightly. Cobble was introduced. And then in the sixties, the Coffee and Levine design, they came in and they were asked to restore the area for the centennial of the park. These are the two main places, sites or designs that we focused on. So here you can see the formality that was brought in, which this would have been a natural edge more. And then they brought in later a red brick, which we don't have a lot of in the park. This shows you some of the major changes: soft edge, McKim-Meaden white, and then the remnants from the 60s. Some more views. So this is our current site. You have a lot of red brick, which is not usual for us in the park. We still have some of the stone. We're missing the balustrade. There's welded wire mesh fencing. The peninsula are fenced off, and then the plantings, and then there's cobble all around. This gives you the hardscape conditions. So none of this area is accessible. We have 4 locations that are all staircased, so you can't access it that way. And then this path right now is too steep as well. So landscape conditions, a lot of invasive plants. We are removing only 1 tree in this portion of the project, and that is for cause. It's a weeping cherry tree that is dying. Other than that, we're keeping everything. You asked us to kind of show a fence diagram, kind of what's going on within this part of the park. We have a lot of temporary fencing, and most of this has to do with being around new plantings. So we create barriers. So most of this is welded wire mesh with rebar or snow fence. We do have the 4-foot fence along Flatbush Avenue up here, and then this is the zoo's 16-foot high fence. But all of these other fences are low, 4 foot or less. These are some views of the existing conditions. Kind of in its existing state, it still has its kind of charm. Here's the cobble that's falling apart. These are the marble piers, the granite coping in the red brick. That's the fence that's there today that we want to replace with a more permanent. This is our site design. So the site design is a restoration for the most part. You have remove and reset the brick pavement, making it ADA accessible, resetting all of the stone coping, bringing back the balustrades, and then redoing the peninsula edges, removing the cobble and creating the soft edge for habitat purposes, and then bringing the water back. Right now, there's very little water because the pond does not function. This gives you an idea of the new elements from the preservation point of view. So you have the balustrades, bringing those back, and then by removing the cobble, we're bringing back what Olmsted and Vox had proposed and what McKim-Meaden White kept, which was that soft edge that went down into the water. That also is very important for habitat because the wildlife, the birds, insects could come in. A new element that we're proposing is to try and minimize the aquatic plant material from migrating, as we'll be putting in pots. Not dissimilar to what happens at Botanic Gardens where we have pots where we have like water lilies that way. In addition to that, instead of having these wet, flat areas where birds could bathe, we're bringing back the water depth, which will be 2 to 3 feet deep. We are proposing bird baths that'll be fixed elements that would say like stainless steel or steel. We still haven't figured out the actual material. That would be in the shape of water lilies, and they'll be at the surface, just beneath the surface, no more than 2 inches, and that way birds can light on them and wash themselves and interact. But here you also have soft edge and then the fence. This shows you the fence diagram, so the balustrade, and then these areas are a 2-foot, 10-inch low steel panel fence that replaces the 4-foot welded wire mesh fence with rebar. So it's still a fence, but it's trying to remove the idea of access. This is the fence. That's that new element. We're setting it back so it won't be right on the outer edge. A lot of the plants that we're planting. This is a view that we're looking to bring back. So you see the new balustrade, cleared peak, clean piers, brick, new planting, soft edge. Same here. This one does not have a balustrade, never did. And then this is the low fence that we're looking at putting. So it'll be stepped back, not in the front, not in the middle, more toward the back of those piers, and then heavily planted. Now I'm going to hand this over to Svetlana.
I'm mic'd up, thank you. Morning, thank you. So I'm just going to speak about the Upper Vale, which is just uphill from the Lower Vale site, also known as the Rose Garden. So the goals in a nutshell are to create an accessible restored space that strengthens the ecological significance of this area and provides a much needed bathroom and a covered space. Just to go over the history of the site, it went through 3 design iterations, starting with the original Olmsted in 1868. You can see it on the left, where it was just an open playground with play equipment and a carousel at the southern end. Then at the turn of the century, during the City Beautiful movement, the site was recreated into a parterre rose garden by McKinney & White. You see here. Then about 50 years later or so, the site was once again redesigned and restored. It was simplified by Coffey and Levine, creating these concrete water basin fountains, only surrounded by lawn, yews, and shade trees, benches along the perimeter. And that is pretty much what we see here on the site today. It's just empty fountains because they haven't worked for many, many years, surrounded by overgrown yews and canopy trees with seating and water, drinking fountain at one end. Just some surveys and site plans of the history. This is another version of the original Olmsted plan. That dot is a very large carousel. Again, this was a playground. Then you're seeing its formalization into parterre gardens with water lily basins here and here, and then a much simplified design with lawn around fountains. This is a photo on the left from McKinney & White, right after installation. So you could see it was quite beautiful. Parterre gardens that were actually very difficult to maintain and take care of. So a few years later, this is what you saw on the right. The fountains were filled in. So this is our existing site, just a quick analysis. We installed an entrance from Flatbush Avenue right here on the eastern side of the site a few years ago. So now one can enter here, but all around the site, the access points are not accessible. They do not conform to ADA code because there are steps everywhere on the south, east, west, pretty much everywhere. The site is also surrounded by lawn, which is not a non-accessible material. The 3 empty basins are concrete and they're separated by additional steps in between. There's lawn all around and then shade canopy trees around those spaces. There's also a significant berm that separates Flatbush Avenue from our site, and then a berm on the north end, but then the topography kind of drops down as you move down to the Lower Vale to the children's pool. So the site is non-accessible, but we do have great drainage here. That's definitely not an issue. So this is another photo of the Coffey and Levine restoration from the 60s on the left. And then the site as you see it here, as you see it today, surrounded by lawn. These are actually overgrown yews that were planted in the 60s. They're low shrubs that just haven't been maintained and they've overgrown and now kind of separate the space into these 3 rooms. Just going through the existing conditions, steps all around, a broken wall at the south end, concrete basins with the U's separating the spaces. You can see they create a lot of hiding spaces here on the perimeter, benches underneath those. So this is our previous conceptual plan that we presented at Landmarks Preservation Commission a few weeks ago. And based on feedback that we received from them, we've actually revised the design a little bit. And this is our new design. We believe the design serves a diversity of visitors that come here, people of all ages and all abilities, and reflects a lot of the current asks and needs of the community. For instance, we heard the need to make the space safer and more accessible, to provide restrooms and also make it more family friendly. We were also asked to strengthen the ecological corridors and connections within Prospect Park so that we could enhance habitat for pollinators and migrating birds. So the design, the design includes a pollinator meadow at the south end with a planted arbor providing shade and seating right next to it. A natural exploration area is found in the middle, which will draw children of all ages. And at the north end, there's a canopied pavilion next to an open lawn with shade trees. We also recreated the view on access with the building across the site. That's the view that exists there today as you move from one fountain to the next. There's a primary asphalt path that stretches across the site as well, which will be fully accessible. And we stretch the meadow from the south end across the site towards the lawn. And that same meadow will frame your views as you move north and south. That will be bound by shrubs and trees. This is a slide that's showing you the designer removal trees in pink. We do have some design removals that we need to remove to provide access to the site and also for the construction of the building. But as you can see on the left, many of the trees are actually non-native invasives. And with our restoration, we'll be installing more native trees, canopy trees that will provide better habitat here. Our design improves accessibility. We're removing all of the steps throughout the site. And the natural exploration area will actually consist of a bounded, it's glued together wood fiber, wood chip material. So that'll also meet accessibility. So our design improves, after hearing concerns from the birding community, we've actually altered our fencing plan a little bit in order to create clear boundaries to protect the native habitat that's here. And but we will be trying to make these fences as transparent as possible by working with the topography and also with the planting. So this site will be expanding the already existing pollinator corridor that's happening here. We did a lot of restoration work during right after Hurricane Sandy with grant money that we received. We restored all of these berms. Perhaps you remember the goats that came here to visit and removed a lot of our invasives. And then we also more recently installed rain gardens and native planting as part of the Parks Without Borders Flatbush Avenue entrance. So we're just trying to enhance that, grow that, and make that connection. So to inform our planting, we are collaborating with our in-house ecologist team from landscape management and operations, but we're also doing our own research. And this is a conceptual planting palette, but it'll include very typical pollinator plants that you've seen and come across frequently, like trilliums, grasses, bee balm, hyssop, some ferns, ground covers like violets, sedges, and caryxes, geraniums. There will also be canopy trees, understory trees, pines and hollies, and flowering seed producing shrubs. So just to look at each one of these areas a little bit more closely, starting with the meadow on the south end. This is the version of the design that we showed to Landmarks a few weeks ago, and this is the revised design. Coming from Flatbush Avenue, you would approach the covered arbor, planted arbor up in the distance, but on the right, the meadow would rise, and on the left, there was a woodland. We're also preserving the, two magnolia trees next to the planted arbor here. The arbor is situated in an area where 4 existing paths meet. And this is very much a concept plan for that arbor. Hopefully you'll never see it in the state because it will be planted, but it'll provide shade and much needed seating in this area. It will also have a low granite wall that's retaining the slope of the meadow, and also a leaning rail, which will have informational graphics that talk about the ecology of the site with graphics and in Braille. That's this right here. The view, and up in the distance is that arbor with the meadow to the right. The view right beneath the arbor, we're proposing granite paving for beneath the arbor. Right now, the concept consists of metal posts, metal structure, and a wood canopy, just so that it relates to the building. But we're going to have to work out the sizing of the members once we start working with our structural engineers and evaluating all the different loads. Next, we come to the natural exploration area, which is in the middle of the site. This is the previous plan that was shown to Landmarks. And this is our revised plan. We've simplified it a little bit. We've removed the curvy path. So now the entire site is just bound by, just has bound wood fiber, which is fully accessible. It also features a sand pit in the middle, surrounded by logs and boulders. Next to that is a very small hand pump that will feed into a catch basin, and then a stone swale that will travel down to another existing catch basin on site. The Dry Creek Bridge, we still have to investigate a little bit, but it's at grade. It's just perhaps a culvert that's traveling over the stone swale that's there. We're still looking at the view corridors as we move from the south or from north to south along this asphalt path. And we would like to bring back additional or reintroduce more canopy trees for shading of this natural exploration area. So instead of typical play equipment, what we're looking at here is natural elements that can be sculpted and carved to encourage exploration. Logs for jumping or climbing under, for sitting on, of course. We will also have an accessible play table, stand table. And this is a view of the site. It's actually not very large. Just to give you a better sense of scale, each one of these zones is about 150 feet in length. This sand pit is 20 by 30. Typical materials that are found in Prospect Park right now: asphalt paving, granite pavers, bonded wood fiber, not yet found, but soon to be installed, boulders, granite wall, sand, and other playgrounds. And typical furniture, all found throughout the park, except for the leaning rail, which will have the infographics. And now I pass it on to David.
Thank you. Good morning. As already mentioned, the pavilion really responds to a lot of the community outreach comments about the need for a restroom. And also this diagram just shows the distance from this well-used area to the restrooms that exist now. This is the earlier site plan proposed to LPC. And this is the earlier scheme that was presented LPC. So you'll see our revised scheme really tries we very much tried to respond to a lot of the LPC comments. And to begin with our site plan, and we'll see it more in the elevations and renderings, what we did was we were largely trying to simplify the building. It's harder to see, but we've tucked the building more into the slope. We've tried to tuck it more into the existing landscape and the new design. So with the new pavilion, we've simplified the material palette. We've tried to simplify the forms. We're looking at using granite cladding, and we're still developing ways to use different finishes of the granite to differentiate the different areas of the facade. Here's a section through the new building. So you can see the upper terrace level is at the same level as the upper path. At the new landscape garden level will be the all gender restrooms. And in that cellar is some of the equipment for the composting toilets. We have a green roof, which is our, which we needed to respond to local law 92 and 94, which for new buildings would require us to have either solar or green roof. And in this site, the green roof made more sense for us. So the program is that all gender restroom, and its facility is really storage for the maintenance of the dedicated maintenance of this new Vale area. In the middle is the terrace level that overlooks, and then the green roof. Here is an aerial view showing how the new building is trying to be simpler. It's conforming more to the circular path. This is a view from the natural exploration area. A view from the southeast. So, so we have the granite panels, the steel or aluminum windows, and the wood canopy above. A view from the southwest. This is approaching from the upper path, the existing upper path. And then we have the opening in the roof, which will orient everyone toward the entry to the terrace, and then the view across the new gardens and landscape of the Upper Vale and that view corridor that Svetlana was describing. So there are many existing structures historically in the park that have been places for an open terrace, restrooms, obviously. And on the upper left is the proposed building, which we feel is very much in scale with the existing buildings, the existing historic buildings in the park. A lot of the materials and textures of the new pavilion are from structures that are already existing in the park, both new and more recent. And here we are back to our overall site plan. I think that's the last slide. Yep. So we welcome your comments.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for putting effort into this renovation. I'm an avid Prospect Park user. I'm there almost every day, so I know how there's a lot of effort that goes into restoring it and making sure it's usable while balancing the need for nature and birds and all of that. So thank you for this. The Lower Vale, I think what you're doing it's great. I don't have any comments on that. I am curious to know how you will resolve the bird bath idea. I think it's an interesting idea, so I'm just curious to see how that evolves. When it comes to the Upper Vale, I do have a couple of questions and comments for you. The first is I do applaud the idea of creating a natural exploration area. I think, there's so many great playgrounds around New York City that have these very specific kind of prescribed types of play equipment. And when you take kids to Prospect Park, they do really kind of run a little bit wild and engage with nature. And it's nice to have a place dedicated for them that is a little bit more imaginative and less, less prescribed like other playgrounds. I do have a couple of questions on what the different materials you're using. The first one has to do with the logs. Are these actual logs that are from fallen trees in the park, or are you buying play dedicated logs that have a special surface treatment to them?
We're still having a conversation about this, obviously. We take a lot of our precedent from the success of Zucker Natural Exploration Area. And what happened there is that we worked with a sculptor that took a lot of the fallen logs from Hurricane Sandy that fell because of Hurricane Sandy and sculpted it. And they are treated, is that correct? They're not treated. But I think to improve the longevity of the material, I think that is something that we would definitely start to look at.
And in addition to that, though, because we have so many trees in the park and they do fall, and we do try and reclaim them in some way. We will be always adding to it because it is a living, breathing material. It does decompose. Like Zucker, we've been pulling in periodically pieces, and what we do is we strip the bark, clean it, soften the edges, make sure they're not or that they don't run into a fall height issue. They're really on the ground. So we will do that through time.
Okay.
But the initial will be more of what Svetlana said.
So as they decay, you may replace them
Yeah.
with other trees. Okay. That answers one of my questions. I think my other question is, when we see a lot of these natural exploration playgrounds out there, the logs are treated just to prevent splintering. There is only so much supervision you can do on the logs consistently to make sure that they're not decaying in a way that could potentially harm children. And there are preservative treatments that are added, specifically with the ones that you buy off the shelf, just to make sure that they remain smooth. So it's just something that I think, you should look at.
Yeah, and we do look at species of trees that don't check as much or don't splinter, like black locust, which is a very hard rot resistant wood. So a lot of the Zucker elements are wood like that. So if you went up to it as it's decaying, it doesn't splinter in the same way, but we really pay attention to the type of species to make sure.
My second question has to do with the stump course. I think that is a great way to use trees that have fallen because you have a little bit less, hand touching and a lot more agility. But I find right now that on the plan, it's kind of isolated and short in terms of length. And one of the things I know kids really enjoy is being able to follow this course and move through the playground and maybe encourage them to explore other areas. So I wonder if there's an opportunity. I know you mentioned the footprint is very small, but to be able to at least have a circuit, something that is not just in isolation, but the stumps maybe take you behind a tree and back so that there's a little bit more engagement with the space beyond them just being on their own. That's something for the future to look at.
I think our previous version might have had that a little bit, but we just haven't worked that back in, but that is an intent. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of shade, I know you mentioned you're going to look at perhaps adding more trees. I do think the views across the site are really important, but unfortunately, due to its orientation, I feel the natural exploration area may not get as much shade as the other spaces, which, of course, will limit its use deep in the summer. So if there's a way to add some trees along the path while still preserving those views, I think that's something that you guys should look at. Beyond the playground, I do have two comments regarding the circulation. The first one is that the path that connects to the Flatbush Avenue entry, it's a little bit askewed to the side. It doesn't feel as kind of a natural, let's say, inviting access point, specifically because the edge to the path is very pointy. Yes, and I'm wondering, I don't know what is the current root system of those trees, but if there's a way to soften those edges and maybe make it imitate a little bit the entry to Flatbush, make it a little more generous. I think that will help with inviting people through the path while also avoiding trampling or people cutting desired lines through it. The second question I have is, I know since your previous submission to now, you have added a lot of fences to protect the wild areas, and I know that's all coming in response to the birding community. I think they're done very thoughtfully while still allowing the space to be very open. But I'm curious about the one south of the open lawn, because it doesn't seem to be enclosing, the
one?
space. What were your thoughts with
There's
that
actually a pretty steep drop there.
one? Okay,
So all of this drops off. And you know, this is a preserved space with shrubs and a woodland. So there's an existing fence there and we're
Mhm.
basically just replacing it. Otherwise, there will be desired lines that go up and down that berm. That's,
but would people just start walking that way and then find the fence and have to turn around? I guess my question is, how is that fence protecting?
I guess on the inside, on the other side of this asphalt path,
Mhm.
we're imagining a thicker woodland that has perennial planting with shrubs
Mhm.
also. It's like a dense layer that you can't really penetrate. We're actually imagining that for all of the fencing, right? So that there's a fence and then in front of that, so that you don't see the fence as
Mhm.
much, there's either a shrub or perennial plants and grasses.
Yeah, I understand that.
Know
I
what you
think one of the major challenges that you see on the park is that people do go off the path and penetrate into the woodland. And even though there's shrubs and perennials, eventually that all gets compacted and minimizes the chances of survival. So I guess my question is more that I understand the logic of the placement of the fence around the exploration area and the meadow,
Mhm.
but this one seems to me that might not prevent people from accessing it. It's just going to prevent people from passing through. But you're still may find your way into the woodland area that you're trying to protect.
We've been experimenting more and more with putting the fencing just slightly back, so visually you could see it from the path.
Mhm.
So they're saying, oh, there is a fence there, as opposed to making it so far in that they've committed. And I think that's what you're speaking to, is the fact that, well, they've already committed. Now they're either gonna be really angry or they'll just
Yeah.
turn around. So we'll be doing more fence studies as we get into this and the height of the plant material, the thickness, the density to do that. So I think we should be able to solve that problem from above. Below, we're talking about a 15 to 20 foot elevation change. So it is a very,
Yeah.
it's open now at that bottom and we haven't had that issue
Okay.
because I think people generally don't go up that.
Yeah, so maybe it's more about the other side, specifically having the open lawn, which is really inviting.
Right.
Slowly you keep going and going until you find your way in the middle of the woodlands. So maybe thinking about the placement of that fence might be helpful just to support your efforts of preserving the woodland, which I think is really
Yeah, I think we need to figure, there's a lawn, how much,
how much.
I think to do what you are asking us to do, I think we need to look at that really closely.
But those are my comments. I think it's exciting that this will be coming online soon.
So I had some questions about the building with the laboratories at the Northwest. Maybe we could look at and it's a very exciting project. It's really beautiful.
Let me know what
Can't
slide
wait.
it is.
Well, I want to see this section first.
Okay.
So just, because you mentioned that you're looking forward to engaging the structural engineers, you don't have a structural engineer yet, or you must have a structural engineer?
We don't have one yet.
You don't have one yet, okay. Okay, so, I mean, it looks heavy, right, the roof, but obviously I'm not a structural engineer either. And I sympathize with, wanting a green roof, but wanting it open, right? So it's this floating green roof and you want to have steel because you want it to be as open as possible, obviously, right? And not wood, which I completely, commend you for. I'm just, it'll be interesting to see what the real section has to be.
Absolutely.
Because you really only need 3 inches of, I mean, it depends what you're putting up there. Is it just sedum or, right? I mean,
No.
it's nothing, it's more than sedum.
Perennials.
Oh, it's
Perennials.
perennials. Okay.
We
9 inch
wanted
Okay,
a part of the pollinated corridor.
so you're gonna have,
Not tree,
drainage, you
Right.
have drainage issues. Well, you will have to manage.
We
the
will have to
water,
do-
Right?
Yeah,
I mean, you can put it in you can collect it. I mean, I don't know what you want to do with it, but that's kind of an exciting moment. Because you don't want to have a lot of gutters,
yeah,
right? So that'll be interesting to see how that gets resolved.
absolutely. So we don't have a structural engineer yet, and the parameters that we were working with was knowing that, we have a fairly deep green roof, knowing that the section needs to somehow accommodate a path for drainage. But I very much agree, as we work through it, I want, so from a design point of view, I want the roof to be as thin as possible as well. And I think one of the things we're looking at is, and I can only just begin schematically to think about how we might work out the structure. But you can see we're trying this idea of trying to very much taper the edges to at least visually create a thin roof. And as we go through the engineering, I share the same goal of trying to make it as thin and light as possible.
So. I mean, imagine probably your columns are gonna have to line up with your perimeter walls at some point, maybe, I don't know, maybe not, because I'm wondering if the
No, that's-
slab where the all gender. Neutral bathroom is could be thinner, because I'm also thinking of how natural light could get in there, because you know, those, you want as much natural light as you can get in a bathroom like this, I would think. It'd be
Right.
great, right? So you've got this kind of two opposing issues where you're holding up the heavy roof, it's gotta come down. And then you need daylight in there. So right now it's kind of hard to believe that the light's gonna get in there under that little. In that.
In the scoop.
Right, so that's something that,
Yeah,
I'm, looking forward to the solution or, on how you could bring in more natural light. And I know on your facade, so you can't bring it on the back
right.
side, but the facade, and you don't want people looking in, but I mean, you have this very heavy granite, facade going on there.
Right.
And this small clerestory, and I guess just, I'm interested in the opportunities for bringing in natural light. So, I mean, I didn't want to tell you, you know what you're doing. So I think that would be great to see how that develops. And then I was just asking about, which I'm sure you're aware of too, is the relationship between the handrail and that edge of that roof that you walk on, and how that gets resolved so that the handrail is not just kind of sitting like, I mean, it's not gonna just sit there plopped on, or, what's the relationship of the handrail to the edge?
Oh, to the,
Front edge here where the lady's standing looking.
Right.
And, it's just that whole edge right there where she is, and the skylight is all very challenging, but also ripe for, design.
I completely
else to
agree,
say
and
it.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that, I think the resolution in response to a lot of those concerns, and I think I understand what you're saying, really are gonna happen as we get more of a green light and develop it in conjunction with our engineer and knowing, and yeah, I see the sort of the tension in that relationship of where the baluster ends and the clerestory, and of course the reality of the clerestory and how that section is needs to be much more opened up, and it's something we're going to study, not just in a section but through modeling, and hopefully we can
Yeah.
also
with
do
daylight
something. Yeah,
because that
and-
faces,
south. That's south. So we have that.
that's great, yeah.
We have that, and
So that's great. And then the, I know you're still working on the facade, and I'm just, again, I
definitely.
no one not tell you what to do, but I was just thinking how that heaviness gets resolved when you also have the opening there, and you've recessed it, which seems very lovely,
Mhm.
kind of recessed and turned. Is it just an opening, or does it get thinner, or is there like a layer there?
The opening into the restrooms.
Yes, that it peels back and around. Maybe we look at the facade, yeah. You had something there. Yeah, so it's wooden.
Oh,
What's
maybe.
going on there now? It's hard to, this lighting in here is, you'd think we'd have a better projector. When all we do is look at things, but so. Wood,
Yeah.
and then You want to see? Yeah. But it's the,
72.
I'm looking at the openings,
The opening.
just maybe
right.
you could just describe what we're looking at.
Here.
Yeah, so it's the heavy stone with the vertical joint. I mean, you tell me.
So we have the granite that forms that part of the curving facade.
Right,
And then the entry to the actual restrooms are, that's that carved out niche. And so hopefully that material, that wood material in there is meant to be the softer, brighter, lighter entrance. So the entrance is marked both by it being this void, that opening in the heavier wall.
mhm.
And it's also the more tactile, more approachable material. And then it's south facing, so hopefully it's going to be obvious. This is the public entrance. This is where you should come in to find the restroom.
I mean, it just seems like that whole facade there with, because the railing and then the wood stripe and then the
Mhm.
clerestory windows and then that whole piece below it, that's all kind of one composition.
I think that's right.
Yeah,
I think we were trying to make it, we're trying to make it more of a, there's a center to the building, and then it's off center to not make it overly, overly imposing as this is the center point of this, important building. So it's trying to be a little bit off center. And then it is forming that L to help you know where to go in. So that we showed that, but that is for the maintenance storage. So we're also hoping, we wanted to show it and not obscure it, but we're hoping that part of the landscaping will hide it more. And that's really where all of
so
the
that could
storage.
get played down, so it's not.
It needs to be,
doesn't look like
yeah,
It almost
Lady of the
completes.
Tiger. idea there.
it needs
Which
to
one
be
do I
played
go
down
to?
more.
Yeah.
definitely.
I do have to say, I'm a little bit worried about the green roof.
Okay,
Because 9 inches of soil for perennials, it's very, very little, specifically as it relates to allowing the plants to keep their thermal mass both in the summer and in the winter. When you have an exposed roof like that, the less soil that you have is not just about the roots. Soil gets super, super hot and it gets super frozen, and you're going to see significant losses over winters if you have such a little amount of mass. So while I do really appreciate the idea of this being a pollinator roof that connects with everything, I'm worried if you don't increase the section or add insulation to it, it may not do well. So one thought to look at, maybe as you start working more with your structural engineer, is whether you would do a sedum edge that allows you to have a very thin profile and architecturally make this look lighter, while increasing the depth in the middle to have perhaps up to 12 inches of soil and have better viability for those perennials. So it gives you the two worlds, the thin roof, but maybe something that's a little bit more viable for those plants. 'Cause They will suffer. The other thought is, I know you added the oculus, and oculuses are great to also lighten the load. It plays very strategically, because then, engineers can work out how the load is distributed, and it requires a lot less material. I do find the location of the oculus a little bit unfortunate, because if it's raining, that's exactly where everybody's coming in to take shelter from the rain. And they're just gonna see a waterfall going through, and I think it makes it a little bit less practical. So I'm wondering, as you work things out with the engineer, looking at the soil mass along with the oculus location, maybe oculi, maybe there's several. Is that a way to advance this forward in a way that still gives you that thin profile, but makes it a little bit more viable for plants and also for weather shelter?
I think that sedum edge is a really great idea. Also, I was thinking, you're gonna have to access this roof, right? So you might also think about a little gravel even. It's not the end of the world, but you might not see it, but at that outer edge, because then you'll also help your profile. If it was
Lightweight
metal,
shale.
it could be metal. Because I was just kind of fall back, yeah.
Much simpler. There weren't any details of any seating. There weren't any details. First of all, I wanted to say that having made a pollinator meadow myself, like I had just had a backacre and I just made a pollinator meadow. I really applaud anybody making a pollinator meadow. Hummingbird tried to use my face to pollinate. Now, that was a great experience I want everybody to have. Beyond that, I would also like to state, like, there weren't any seats in this. And why did you make that choice? I mean, it seemed purposeful that there weren't seats in there.
I mean, up above.
Yeah,
the-
like, and because it seems like there's someone standing there peering out, but there are no benches of any sort near it or in it.
Okay,
Yeah, just,
well, see, let me do.
or maybe you were thinking that you're gonna put seats later, but you didn't detail it now.
Let me go with three. Respond to three things quickly.
Okay.
So it's, we have a schematic present. It's interesting. We had one meeting with a green roof subcontracting specialist. And actually, and it's hard to tell from, but the thinness of the edges, we actually do have a thinner layer on the perimeter, the sedum layer, and the thicker, but we didn't allow for 12. We're really thinking it's 9 inches in the middle. Secondly, the oculus in the rendering seems like this enormous thing. It's right now we have it designed, it's about a 4-foot diameter. And I don't, and we aren't thinking of the pavilion as necessarily this place to go when it's pouring rain. I mean, it provides that shelter, but it's not meant to be necessarily programmed for rainy days.
Just keep in mind, there isn't shelter around here at
Yeah.
all, so it's
Okay.
just, it will become that.
Yeah, so you'd have to go and go. And then the seating, I think it's a great suggestion. I think we kept it open for flexibility of use. And once we plant it, it's less flexible, but I think we're still.
Is it possible to have seating that can be dragged around, you know,
Yep.
for like weight? So it'd be heavy enough that you couldn't take it out, but that you could move it around if you're in there.
So what you don't see behind is the path that's directly behind, which has a row of benches and seating right off of that path. So this building is right adjacent to that path. We were treating it similar to the Peristyle, the Concert Grove Pavilion, various buildings within the park that are not, there aren't benches, they're unprogrammed space. So let's just say somebody wants to have a yoga class, Brooklyn Nature Days. There's all these loose group activities that take place in the park. And so what we were looking at it as unprogrammed. That was the thing that an element that a lot of the community wanted us to make sure we're not over programming it.
Sure.
You know, they instantly talked about rental space and like, this isn't a rental space. So there are a lot of other benches and seating all around, but that's how we were looking at it. You do want to put a bench up there, and we could look into, because we have a maintenance, we were having a fixed post, as they say. So fixed maintenance people to take care of this. We're making that a requirement. We possibly could look into having chairs, and they could bring chairs out and bring them up. It would be easy. We haven't gotten that far ahead, but that's a possibility.
I do encourage you to think about this as weather shelter. I mean, the Concert Grove that you mentioned, whenever it rains and in the summer it rains out of nowhere, people don't even fit. I mean, everybody goes there. There's just such little amount of shelter in the park. I do think it's an important asset to have this, especially next to a children's area. You're gonna have a lot of families there. It's gonna rain. They're gonna run there. You should think about that, you know, that part as part of the program. If you mentioned the thickness, the roof gets the thickest at 9 inches and then it tapers. I don't think that's gonna work for pollinator species. Like, these plants do really need a lot more thickness. So if your 9 inches are only in the center, you're talking mostly about sedums, which do have flowers and do attract pollinators. But a perennial plant is not gonna do very well in less than 9 inches. So I think you need to look at the plant species a little bit more carefully if that is the thickness of the roof.
I think we will put installation.
mean, as it seems, you know, the certain infographics is mentioned quite a bit. So I'd be curious if you maybe more schematically, like, you know, where is the signage going? What does it look like? You know, is it just interpretive with text and image, or is it actually like infographic in some ways? And
We're very excited to study that more.
Commissioners, any more comments before I summarize for the team? Christian, David and Svetlana, we want to thank you for bringing these two historic spaces forward into the present for the use of New Yorkers and for the very sensitive work that you did on both the upper and the lower Vale. My fellow commissioners' comments were primarily around the upper Vale, and I'll just summarize quickly, just looking at the natural exploration area, the STEM course, and the circulation from Flatbush, the fencing we talked about, and the plant material, the combination of the fencing and the plant material in that area. And then the rest of the comments, for the most part, have to do with the green roof section, as we've been talking, the species choice with the soil depth, the oculi, the weight of it, and the plant choices related to that, the railing and the infographics. And the, sorry, yes, I left that out, and the clerestory window and the lighting in the restroom. But all in all, we look forward to seeing your development of this. We realize that you're just coming into preliminary. And thank you very much for this very sensitive contribution to our city's parks. Appreciate the work. Okay, so we are now moving on to the public meeting. It's commencing with the consent agenda. Items number 28424 and 28456. Item number 28456 is withdrawn. Item number 28434 has also been withdrawn and will be calendared for a public meeting at the May 22nd meeting. Staff has not noted any recusals. Are there any recusals to note? Okay, let the record show there are no recusals. Okay, and I'm going to now call for a vote on the consent agenda. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote for the consent agenda. Kenseth Armstead?
Approval, except item 28431. I'm abstaining from that one.
Abstain, okay. Okay, Isabel Casilla? Approval. Lori Hawkinson?
Approval.
Villa Heinzen?
Approval.
Manuel Miranda?
Approval.
Jimmy Van Bramer?
Approval.
I also vote to approve all, so let the record show that commissioners present have approved all, with the exception that Commissioner Armstead abstains from item number 28431. Let the record show that the consent agenda is approved and the public meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.